The biting wind howled across the sun-scorched plains, whipping sand against Elias Thorne's weathered face as he rode the fence line. His ranch, a lonely sentinel against the vast, unforgiving expanse, was his only companion these past 10 years, ever since the fever took Mary and their boy. He'd learned to live with ghosts, with the silence. But the silence today felt different. It felt violated. A flicker of something unnatural, something not of the land, caught his eye near the dry creek bed. He urged his aging mare, Betsy, forward, his hand instinctively resting on the worn stock of the Winchester in its scabbard. What he saw made the blood in his veins turn to ice. She was half buried in the sand, clothes torn to shreds, a crude, raw brand seared into the delicate skin of her shoulder, a grotesque symbol of ownership. Her breath was a shallow, painful rasp, her eyes, when they fluttered open to fix on him, were wells of unspeakable terror. This was no accident. This was cruelty manifest. He dismounted, his movement slow, deliberate, not wanting to frighten her further. "Easy now," he said, his voice rough from disuse, yet gentle. "I'm not gonna hurt you," he knelt, his shadow falling over her. She flinched, a whimper escaping her cracked lips. He saw the bruises, the fear, the utter desolation. He had seen death in the war, seen men broken, but this was a different kind of horror. It stirred something in him, a cold fury he thought long dead. With infinite care, he began to clear the sand from around her, his calloused hands surprisingly tender. She was so light, so fragile, when he finally lifted her. Her head lolled against his chest, a faint scent of fear and wildflowers clinging to her. He carried her back to the desolate quiet of his home, every step a vow. This place, once a tomb of his memories, would now be a sanctuary. He laid her on his own narrow cot, the only soft place in the Spartan cabin. He cleaned her wounds with what little whiskey he had, her sharp intakes of breath tearing at something deep within him. Her eyes, wide and haunted, followed his every move. He brought her water, holding the cup to her lips. She drank, choked, then drank again. He offered her a piece of dried jerky, which she nibbled at with the caution of a starved animal. Hours passed in near silence, broken only by her occasional pained sighs and his gruff, reassuring murmurs. He sat in his worn wooden chair, watching over her, the Winchester across his lap. Sleep was impossible. The image of that brand, the terror in her eyes, it was seared into his mind. Towards dawn, her fever broke. She stirred, her gaze finding his in the dim light. Who are you?" she whispered, her voice like autumn leaves skittering across dry ground. "Elias Thorne," he replied. "This is my place." "You're safe here." A single tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek. Safe. The word was a question, a plea, a bitter memory. He saw the raw despair in her eyes, the imprint of horrors he could only begin to imagine. No one has ever called me beautiful," she murmured then, seemingly to herself, her voice barely audible, a faint, broken whisper lost almost immediately to the wind sighing outside. Elias looked at her, truly looked. Beneath the dirt, the bruises, the exhaustion, there was a delicate strength, a flicker of defiance in the depths of her gaze. "Well, they were fools then," he said, his voice surprisingly steady. "You are beautiful." Her eyes widened, a fragile surprise dawning. Why do you call me beautiful, cowboy?" The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken pain and disbelief. Before he could answer, a shadow fell across the doorway. Not his shadow. The moment was shattered. Trouble had found them. The man standing there was tall, clad in expensive, dark cloth that seemed out of place in the dusty landscape. His face was handsome, almost angelic, but his eyes were chips of obsidian, cold and utterly devoid of warmth. Behind him, two hulking figures, thugs with cruelty etched into their features, flanked him like grotesque sentinels. Silas Blackwood, the man announced himself, his voice smooth as oiled leather, yet carrying an unmistakable undercurrent of menace. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." His gaze flickered to the girl on the cot, a possessive, chilling glint in his eyes. Elias rose slowly, placing himself between Blackwood and the cot. He was a head shorter than Blackwood, broader, made of granite and grit. She ain't property, mister, Elias stated, his voice a low growl. She's a human being. And she's staying here, Blackwood chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. A mail-order bride, rancher. A contract. Legally mine. Her name is Lila. Or whatever I choose to call her. He took a step forward. Now, be a good man and step aside. This doesn't concern you. Elias didn't flinch. His hand moved infinitesimally closer to the Winchester propped against the wall. It concerns me when I find a woman half dead on my land, branded like cattle. Lila, behind him, let out a small, terrified gasp. The word branded hung in the air, thick and ugly. Blackwood's smile tightened. She was unruly. Required discipline. A lesson she seems to have forgotten. He gestured to his men. Fetch her. The thug started forward, but Elias moved faster than a man his age had any right to. The Winchester was in his hands, leveled. Take another step, and you'll see how unruly I can be. The air crackled with tension. The thugs hesitated, looking to Blackwood. Blackwood's eyes narrowed, his charismatic facade cracking to reveal the pure, unadulterated malice beneath. You're making a grave mistake, old man. A very grave mistake. He held Elias's gaze for a long moment, then, with a curt nod, he and his men retreated, melting back into the harsh sunlight. But Elias knew. This wasn't over. This was merely a pause. The dust clouds from their departure were still miles away, but the threat they represented choked the air. What they didn't know, what Blackwood couldn't comprehend, was the iron resolve solidifying in Elias Thorne. He'd lost everything once. He wouldn't stand by and watch another innocent be destroyed. Not on his watch. He turned back to Lila. Her face was white, her eyes wide with a fresh wave of terror. He'll come back, she whispered. He always comes back. Let him, Elias said, his jaw set. He checked his meager supply of ammunition. Not enough. Never enough when facing down pure evil. He looked at Lila, truly looked. He saw not just a victim, but a survivor. He called you Lila, Elias said, his voice softer now. Is that your name? She nodded, clutching the rough blanket he'd given her. Lila Marie, a small, hesitant offering of identity. He promised a new life. A husband. A home. Her voice broke. The contract, it wasn't for marriage. It was for servitude. Worse, Elias felt a cold dread seep into his bones. This was more than just a cruel man and a broken agreement. This was something darker, more insidious. He watched her as she gathered her courage, her small frame trembling. There were others, she whispered, the words tumbling out, barely audible, as if speaking them aloud gave them a terrible power. Girls like me. Some younger. He has a place, far from here, hidden in the canyons. He calls it his sanctuary, but it's a prison. He breaks them. He sells them. Or he keeps them. Her eyes were wide, reflecting horrors he could scarcely imagine. The brand, it's his mark. To show we belong to him. Forever. The words hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't just a brutal husband. This was a monster, a trafficker, a tyrant ruling a hidden kingdom of suffering. The initial confrontation had been a mere skirmish. The war was yet to come. He understood now the depths of Blackwood's possessiveness, the chilling certainty in his voice. Lila wasn't just a runaway bride, she was an escapee from a living hell, a witness to unspeakable crimes. And Blackwood would stop at nothing to silence her, to drag her back into the abyss. Elias looked out the window at the vast, empty landscape. It felt like it was closing in on them. Why me? Lila asked, her voice raw with anguish. Why did he choose me for this? Elias had no answer for that. The cruelty of men like Blackwood defied reason. But he knew one thing. He chose wrong when he crossed my path, Elias said, his voice grim. And he chose wrong when he hurt you. He saw a flicker of something in her eyes then, not hope, not yet, but a dawning awareness that perhaps, just perhaps, she wasn't entirely alone in this fight. The silence in the cabin was heavy, laden with the weight of her revelation and the certainty of impending violence. He knew Blackwood would return, and he would return with overwhelming force. Everything was about to get much worse. The narrator's voice, grave and solemn, might cut in here. What drives a man to such depths of depravity? And what does it take for another to stand against it? Elias Thorne was about to find out. Would you have his courage? Ponder that, as the storm gathers. The sun bled crimson across the horizon, painting the desolate plains in hues of fire and blood, a grim portent of the night to come. Elias had done what he could. He'd reinforced the cabin door with an old iron bar, checked the boarded-up windows, and positioned his meager supply of ammunition within easy reach. Lila, wrapped in his old coat, sat by the cold hearth, her eyes fixed on the flames he'd kindled, as if seeking solace in their dance. The quiet was a living thing, coiling around them, tightening with each passing moment. He has so many men, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, echoing the fear that thrummed in the air. They do whatever he says. They enjoy it. Elias didn't doubt it. Evil often attracted company. He remembered the cold, dead eyes of Blackwood's thugs. We'll face them, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument, though inside, a cold knot of apprehension was tightening. He was old, one man against a coming tide. But the fire in Lila's eyes, the ghost of defiance he'd seen earlier, was starting to burn a little brighter. She was more than just a victim, she was a survivor who had dared to flee. That took a courage he deeply respected. He thought of Mary, of his boy, of the life stolen from him. He had failed to protect them from the indiscriminate cruelty of fate. He would not fail Lila. Not now. The distant thrum of horses' hooves reached them first, a low, ominous vibration through the hard-packed earth, growing steadily louder. Elias moved to the window, peering through a crack in the boards. Silhouetted against the dying light, a small army was approaching, at least a dozen riders, Blackwood at their head, a dark stain on the landscape. They're here, he said, his voice flat. Lila's breath hitched. He saw her hand go to the crude brand on her shoulder, a subconscious gesture of pain and fear. He walked over to her, knelt down. Listen to me, Lila, he said, his voice urgent but calm. Stay down, stay away from the windows. No matter what you hear. She looked at him, her eyes wide pools of terror, but she nodded. He saw a tear escape and trace a path down her cheek. He wanted to offer comfort, to say something reassuring, but words felt hollow in the face of such calculated malice. Instead, he simply met her gaze, a silent promise passing between them. He would not let them take her. The first shout came from outside, Blackwood's voice, amplified by arrogance. Thorne! Send out the girl. This is your last chance. No harm will come to you if you cooperate. Elias remained silent, his Winchester steady in his grip. The lie was so blatant it was almost insulting. Harm was Blackwood's currency. Another shout, angrier this time. Thorne! Don't be a fool. You can't protect her. Then, the first shot. A bullet splintered the wooden shutter near Elias's head. The siege had begun. Gunfire erupted from all sides, a relentless barrage tearing into the small cabin. Wood splintered, dust filled the air. Elias returned fire sparingly, making each shot count, aiming to deter, to wound, not necessarily to kill, not yet. He was a rancher, not a murderer, but he knew that line might blur before this night was over. Lila huddled by the hearth, her hands pressed over her ears, her body trembling. But through her fear, Elias saw something else emerge, a fierce, desperate resolve. She wasn't cowering, she was enduring. Hours crawled by. The attackers probed, tested, their shots becoming more accurate, more dangerous. Elias moved from window to window, a grim phantom in the smoke-filled cabin, his movements economical, his focus absolute. He was a man possessed, fueled by a righteous fury and a desperate need to protect the fragile life huddled in his home. He felt a searing pain in his left arm. A bullet had grazed him. He ignored it, the adrenaline masking the worst of it. But he was bleeding, and they knew it. The attackers grew bolder. He could hear them close to the walls, trying to find a way in. The door shuddered under a heavy blow. Then another. The iron bar groaned. He knew it wouldn't hold forever. He looked at Lila. Her eyes met his, filled with a terrible understanding. This was it. The final stand. Lila, he rasped, his throat raw from smoke and shouting. The cellar. Under the floorboards by the stove. It's small, but it's hidden. Get in there. Now she shook her head, her eyes blazing with a courage that stunned him. No. I won't hide. Not anymore. She scrambled to her feet, grabbing the heavy iron poker from the hearth. Her hands were shaking, but her grip was firm. I can fight. Before Elias could argue, the door burst inward with a splintering crash. Blackwood stood framed in the doorway, a demonic silhouette against the flickering firelight from outside. His face was contorted in a mask of triumph and rage. The game is over, old man, he snarled, stepping into the cabin, his men crowding behind him. She's mine. Elias raised his Winchester, but a shot from one of Blackwood's men struck his right shoulder. The rifle clattered to the floor. He staggered, pain exploding through him. He was disarmed, wounded. Blackwood advanced, a cruel smile playing on his lips. You should have listened. He gestured to his men. Take her. Two of them lunged for Lila. But as they reached for her, Lila screamed, a raw, primal sound of defiance, and swung the iron poker with all her might. It connected with the side of one man's head with a sickening thud. He crumpled to the floor. The other thug paused, momentarily shocked by her ferocity. That tiny hesitation was all Elias needed. Despite the agony in his shoulder, he launched himself at Blackwood, a wounded lion making its last stand. They crashed to the floor, Elias's hands finding Blackwood's throat. Blackwood was stronger, younger, but Elias was driven by a desperation that bordered on madness. The cabin descended into chaos. Gunshots, screams, the thud of bodies. Elias grappled with Blackwood, the man's sickeningly sweet cologne filling his nostrils, the cold malice in his eyes inches away. Blackwood's thumbs pressed into Elias's windpipe. Stars exploded behind Elias's eyes. He was fading. Then, a blur of motion. Lila, her face a mask of desperate fury, brought the poker down again, this time on Blackwood's arm. The tyrant screamed, his grip loosening. Elias gasped for air, rolled away, and saw his fallen Winchester just out of reach. One of Blackwood's remaining thugs raised his pistol, aiming at Lila. Without thinking, Elias threw himself in the path of the bullet. It slammed into his side, a fiery agony that stole his breath. He fell, a choked cry escaping his lips. But his sacrifice had bought Lila a precious second. She screamed again, distracting the gunman, who turned back towards her. And in that instant, a shot rang out, not from Elias, not from Blackwood's men. From the doorway. A figure stood there, silhouetted. The local sheriff, old Jedediah, flanked by a small posse of townsfolk Elias hadn't seen in years, drawn by the sounds of a full-blown war. "Drop your weapons, Blackwood!" Jedediah's voice boomed, cutting through the pandemonium. "It's over." Blackwood, clutching his injured arm, his face a mask of disbelief and fury, saw his men hesitate, then slowly lower their guns. The fight was gone from them. Their leader, for all his bluster, was just a man, bleeding and beaten. The fight drained out of Elias. He lay on the floor, bleeding from 3 wounds, each breath a struggle. Lila rushed to his side, her face streaked with soot and tears. "Elias! Elias, stay with me!" Her voice was frantic. He tried to speak, but only a bloody cough emerged. His vision was blurring. Through the haze, he saw Blackwood being disarmed, his arrogant sneer replaced by a look of impotent rage. He saw the townsfolk, their faces grim, tending to the wounded, securing the prisoners. He felt Lila's small, surprisingly strong hands pressing against his bleeding side, trying to staunch the flow. He looked into her eyes, no longer haunted by terror, but shining with a fierce, protective light. The light he'd first seen, the beauty he'd recognized. His world narrowed to her face, her voice. You fought, he managed to whisper, a faint smile touching his lips. Like a beautiful warrior, her tears fell freely now, splashing onto his cheek. You saved me, Elias. You saved me. He felt a profound peace settle over him. He had faced his ghosts. He had stood for something. He had protected the innocent. Maybe, just maybe, this was redemption. The narrator's voice, softer now, filled with emotion, might say, in the face of unspeakable evil, a reluctant hero rose. A forgotten woman found her strength. Their courage, born of desperation and a flicker of hope, changed everything. Would you find such strength within yourself when all seems lost? Click here to see another story of courage against the odds, and don't forget to subscribe for more tales that stir the soul. Weeks later, the sun, no longer a malevolent eye but a warm, life-giving presence, streamed through the repaired window of Elias Thorne's cabin. He sat propped up in his cot, his arm in a sling, his side bandaged, but his eyes clear. Lila moved quietly about the small space, tending to him, a newfound grace in her movements. The brand on her shoulder was still there, a scar that would never fully fade, but it no longer defined her. It was a reminder of what she had survived, not what she was. Blackwood and his men were gone, taken away by the sheriff, their reign of terror ended. Word had come that his hidden sanctuary had been found, its other victims freed. Lila had given her testimony, her voice clear and strong, ensuring Blackwood would never hurt anyone again. The cabin, once so silent and filled with Elias's solitary grief, now held a different kind of quiet, a peaceful, companionable silence. Sometimes, they talked, sharing small pieces of their pasts, tentative bridges built across chasms of pain. Other times, they simply existed in the same space, a comfort in shared presence. One afternoon, as Lila brought him a bowl of broth, she paused. The question that had hung in the air since that first terrible night finally found its voice again, softer now, imbued with a different meaning. Elias, she began, her gaze steady on his, why did you call me beautiful, cowboy? That first day? When I was like that. Elias looked at her. He saw the scars, yes, but he saw the resilience that had blossomed from them. He saw the kindness in her eyes, the strength in the set of her jaw, the spirit that had refused to be extinguished even in the deepest darkness. He remembered the broken, terrified creature he'd found, and he saw the courageous woman who stood before him now, a woman who had fought for her life and his. Because, he said, his voice raspy but firm, his gaze unwavering. Even then, through all the dirt and the fear, I saw your spirit. And there's nothing in this world more beautiful than a spirit that refuses to break, Lila. Nothing more beautiful than the courage to fight for the light when you're surrounded by darkness. A slow smile spread across her face, a genuine, radiant smile that transformed her features, chasing away the last shadows of her past. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. And you, Elias Thorne, she said softly, her eyes shining, you have the most beautiful spirit of all. He reached out his good hand, and she took it. Their fingers intertwined. The lonely ranch on the edge of the wilderness was no longer lonely. Two broken souls, scarred by the cruelties of the world, had found solace, and perhaps something more, in each other. They had faced the darkness and emerged, not unscathed, but stronger, together. A new family, forged in fire and loyalty, under the vast, indifferent sky that now seemed to hold a promise of hope. The narrator might conclude, and so, in the harshest of lands, beauty was redefined. Not as flawless perfection, but as unbreakable spirit, as defiant courage, as the quiet strength to heal and love again. Elias and Lila found their sanctuary, not in a place, but in each other. Their story reminds us that even in the deepest despair, hope can take root, and the most reluctant hearts can find redemption. What do you think? Was Elias right to risk everything? Let us know in the comments below, and may you always find the courage to see the beauty in others, and in yourself.